The whole thing started with a fine, a stupid, ridiculous, almost comical fine. I came home one Friday evening, exhausted after a long day of work, and found a brightly colored notice taped to my front door like a parking ticket on a windshield. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe something left for my neighbor. But no, it had my name, my address, and in bold letters at the top, HOA violation notice, unauthorized property modification. I laughed, out loud, alone. It was my driveway. I had spent a Saturday afternoon patching some cracks that had formed over the past winter. Just some wear and tear from freezing rain and the occasional overambitious Amazon van. I went down to the hardware store, picked up a sealant kit and a gallon of gray paint that matched what was already there, at least what I thought matched. I didn't measure it against a swatch or call a specialist. I just did the job like any homeowner would. Apparently, I had used the wrong color. According to the notice, I had violated Section 14B of the Meadow Ridge HOA Code, which required homeowners to get prior approval for any visible alterations to the exterior of their property. The paint I used, Storm Cloud Gray, was not the approved shade, which was listed as Pavement Mist. The fine? $150, with an additional $50 per day until corrected. I stared at the paper in disbelief. It was absurd. I hadn't built a treehouse or installed neon lights on the roof. I had patched a crack in a slab of concrete, and now I was being penalized as if I'd set fire to the community playground. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash. Surely this was a mistake. A form letter, sent out by an overzealous board member with too much time and not enough perspective. But then came the second letter. This one was certified mail, official-looking, with legal language and a firm tone. It threatened legal action if I didn't respond within 7 business days. I called the HOA office, expecting to speak with a receptionist or maybe a manager who would understand how ridiculous this was. Instead, I was put on hold, then transferred twice before a man named Randall Kerr came on the line. He introduced himself as the president of the HOA board. His voice was sharp, clipped, and entirely devoid of humor. "Mr. Cole," he said, "your actions have violated the community aesthetic standards. We take these matters very seriously." "Seriously?" I said. "It's paint. On a driveway. Non-compliance leads to decline. We have procedures for a reason." I tried to reason with him. Explained that I only wanted to prevent the crack from getting worse, that the color difference was barely noticeable, that I'd even repaint it if it mattered that much. But Kerr wasn't interested in compromise. "You can appeal the fine at the next board meeting," he said. "Until then, daily penalties will continue to accrue." I hung up, fuming. I wasn't some HOA troublemaker. I mowed my lawn, waved. At Neighbors, paid my dues on time. I'd never been cited before, but now for trying to maintain my property, I was being punished. I talked to a few neighbors about it, hoping someone else had gone through something similar. Most sympathized, but weren't eager to get involved. "The board doesn't like pushback," one said. "It's easier to just pay it and move on." Another neighbor, a retiree named Susan, told me she once got fined for having curtains that were too bright. "It's all politics," she whispered. "Randall runs this place like a kingdom. No one really knows where he came from. He's not exactly neighborly." That stuck with me. No one really knows where he came from. I started wondering why someone would even want to be that invested in an HOA. What did Randall Kerr get out of it? And why was he taking such a hard line over a paint job? I decided to appeal the fine, but the board meeting was more theater than process. The room was packed with suits, Randall and his crew sitting at a long table, all with identical expressions of disdain. I presented my case calmly, even showed before and after photos. The color difference was so minor it barely showed up in print. They listened, nodded, and then denied the appeal unanimously. "We must maintain the integrity of our standards," Randall said, as if I'd defaced a national monument. That's when I knew something was off. The reaction wasn't just excessive, it was strategic, deliberate. They weren't correcting an error, they were making an example. But of what? When I got home, I pulled out the letter again and looked more closely. At the bottom, below Randall's signature was a printed name. R.A. Kerr, President, Meadow Ridge HOA. That triggered a memory. I used to work for a defense contractor a few years ago, mostly in IT. Part of my job was managing internal access controls, which meant I occasionally saw names of employees flagged for restricted file access. Randall A. Kerr. I remembered the name because it had shown up on a list I was told not to keep a copy of, an internal audit that flagged personnel with potential external intelligence risks. Not criminals, not yet, but people of interest. Usually nothing came of it. Sometimes it was just a bad investment in a foreign company or a flagged overseas vacation. But I remembered that name. I always remembered names tied to red flags. It was probably a coincidence, had to be, but the unease had started to set in. Over the next few days, I started noticing things, small things. A car that lingered too long at the stop sign near my house. A man I'd never seen before walking his dog down my street 3 times in one afternoon, always glancing at my house. My mailbox left slightly open, even though I knew I had closed it. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But there was a strange buzz in the air, like something humming just below the surface. It wasn't just about paint anymore. It felt like I had stepped on something buried, something I wasn't meant to find. And the deeper I thought about it, the more convinced I became. This wasn't about a driveway. This was about control. And maybe, just maybe, about secrets much darker than paint swatches and HOA bylaws. Luis and I sat on his back porch one warm evening, the kind of night where the air feels thick but quiet, like the world is holding its breath. I handed him the letter from the HOA, the certified notice, the lawsuit papers, every scrap I had collected so far. He flipped through the pages with a practiced eye, nodding occasionally but saying little. His military background wasn't about bravado. It was about patience and observation. After a long pause, he looked up and said, "We need to dig, quietly." That was the start of our unofficial investigation. We knew we had to be careful. If the HOA board was watching me, and it was clear they were, then poking around too loudly could put us on their radar even more. Luis taught me how to use OSINT, open source intelligence tools, to find things hidden in plain sight. We started with public property records, zoning laws, and corporate filings. The HOA was supposed to be a simple neighborhood association, but the more we looked, the more complicated it became. The first strange thing we found was the HOA's incorporation documents. The Meadow Ridge Homeowners Association wasn't just a local community group. It was tied directly to a company called Apex Vector Development. That name didn't ring any bells for me, but Luis's eyes lit up when he saw it. "They're a private security firm," he said. "One with government contracts." We dug deeper. Apex Vector's address was a high-rise office building downtown, but the suite number was unlisted, like a secret. Their website was minimal, a single page with vague marketing jargon about advanced security solutions and integrated threat assessments. No contact numbers, no client lists, no employees named. It was deliberately opaque. Our next step was to look at the HOA's finances. Most people never read their HOA's public financial disclosures, but these documents were a goldmine. We combed through years of reports and statements, looking for anything unusual. There were plenty of typical expenses: landscaping, maintenance, utilities, but mixed in were large payments to obscure companies with no obvious connection to property upkeep. One name kept popping up: Newbrook Environmental Services. At first it sounded harmless: environmental cleanup, waste disposal, something you might expect near a neighborhood. But the company was registered in Delaware, notorious for allowing anonymous ownership. When we traced the banking information, It linked back to a financial institution used by a federal subcontractor rumored to be a front for domestic surveillance operations. Luis's voice dropped when he said it. This isn't landscaping. This is money moving around, laundering or funding covert operations. We needed proof. We decided to get eyes on the HOA clubhouse, the building at the community's edge where all the meetings happened. It always looked suspicious to me. High fences, security cameras, even a keypad with biometric scanning at the front door. It was less a clubhouse and more like a mini fortress. Luis brought over his drone. I'd never flown one before, but it was small and silent, perfect for a quick flyover. One evening, just before sunset, we launched it behind my house and navigated it carefully over the rooftops toward the clubhouse. We hovered it near a second-story window, zooming in on what looked like a server room. Racks of blinking machines, network cables, and even biometric scanners lined the walls. I snapped photos with the drone's camera. The equipment labels had codes that looked military, combinations of letters and numbers that matched government asset tracking formats I'd seen during my previous job. I looked at Luis, trying to hide my shock. Why would an HOA have a data center? I asked. Luis shrugged. They shouldn't, unless this HOA is doing more than just managing lawns. The next day, I found a new letter taped to my door. This one accusing me of unauthorized aerial surveillance and threatening to call the police if I flew the drone again. Attached was a grainy photo of me holding the controller, taken from above. Someone had been watching me. The reality hit hard. They weren't just monitoring the clubhouse, they were monitoring me. Our investigation grew more intense. I set up burner email accounts, VPNs, and encrypted messaging to communicate with Luis and dig further. Luis called some old contacts from the Army intelligence community, looking for anyone who recognized Apex Vector or Newbrook. The answers were vague, but troubling. Apex Vector was involved in projects linked to government surveillance and risk assessments, projects never meant to be public. One contact quietly mentioned domestic data collection and community infiltration programs. Meanwhile, the neighborhood grew colder. People avoided me at the mailbox or gave curt nods when I passed. Conversations stopped when I approached. It felt like living in a spy novel. I even installed motion sensor lights around my property and changed my passwords daily. My phone started acting weird, draining battery fast and rebooting randomly. Luis said it was probably being tapped. I began sleeping with it inside a Faraday pouch. Then the intimidation turned personal. One evening I came home to find my front door slightly open. Nothing was stolen, nothing disturbed except one thing, a single paint swatch card, stormy slate, lying on my kitchen table, the exact shade I had used on my driveway. It was a message. We're watching. We know what you did. Luis, and I sat that night on his porch, no words spoken for a while. The line between neighborly dispute and something much darker had been crossed. We had evidence, but not enough to confront or expose them without risking serious repercussions. I thought about reaching out to the authorities, but was afraid the HOA's reach might extend that far. Then I remembered Elena, an old friend from my contractor days. She'd worked for the Department of Homeland Security in cyber investigations. I had her encrypted contact info, so I sent a short message. Need to talk. Urgent. Trust no one. Her reply came hours later. Meet me tomorrow. You drive. Leave your phone behind. That's when I realized the game had changed. The HOA wasn't just a local bully. It was a front for something bigger, something with federal ties. And now, Luis and I were in their sights. We had stumbled into a network of secrets, money laundering and surveillance that reached far beyond our quiet neighborhood. The quiet crack in my driveway was no longer just a crack. It was the first sign of a fracture in a system I never saw coming, one that might just expose everything. The moment Homeland Security agents showed up at my door, everything changed. Their black SUVs, dark suits, and clipped accents made it clear this wasn't a routine neighborhood dispute anymore. Two men introduced themselves as Special Agents Martinez and Cohen. They carried badges, But they weren't here to give me a warning or offer condolences. They wanted information. "Mr. Cole," Agent Martinez began, her tone firm but not unkind. "We've been monitoring the Meadow Ridge Homeowners Association for some time. Your recent actions, requesting financial disclosures, flying a drone near the clubhouse, and publicizing concerns, have brought us new evidence. We'd like to ask you some questions." I nodded, my heart pounding. The gravity of the situation hit me all at once. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. This was federal. And it was serious. They explained the investigation was into suspected money laundering and illegal surveillance activities connected to the HOA board. According to what they'd pieced together, Meadow Ridge's HOA was a front for moving millions of dollars through fake contractor invoices, shell companies, and secret bank accounts. These funds were linked to broader networks involved in covert surveillance programs operating domestically, some even linked to foreign entities. Agent Cohen pulled out a folder thick with photographs and documents. One photo showed a board member, Randall Kerr, boarding a private jet headed to Panama. Another was a spreadsheet showing invoices from Newbrook Environmental Services, the same company Luis and I had found during our digging. They'd traced substantial payments funneled through Newbrook to offshore accounts. I listened, stunned. It was like a movie unfolding before my eyes. But this was my real life. Over the next few weeks, I became what they called an informal cooperating witness. I provided everything Luis and I had gathered: financial records, photos from the drone flight, emails between board members, and even recordings from a couple of HOA meetings I'd secretly recorded. The agents were methodical, cross-referencing our information with their own surveillance and intelligence. One night after a long debriefing session, Agent Martinez said quietly, "You've done a lot more than you realize. Your persistence has broken open a case that's been stalling for months. Without your involvement, the HOA's illegal operations might have gone unnoticed for years." I felt a strange mix of pride and fear. I was just an ordinary guy who refused to repaint a driveway. Now I was part of a federal investigation. The board members started to fall like dominoes. A week later, news broke that Randall Kerr and 2 other board members had been arrested on charges of money laundering, conspiracy, and obstructing a federal investigation. The community was shaken. Reporters flooded Meadow Ridge, cameras rolling, as agents handcuffed the once untouchable HOA leadership. Neighbors who once ignored me now approached, asking questions, apologizing for siding with the board. I learned that Kerr had long used the HOA to control the community, suppress dissent, and funnel illicit money. Some whispered that his ties reached well beyond our neighborhood, into political circles, and even intelligence agencies. The investigation revealed more than just financial crimes. Hidden within the clubhouse's secured server room, the one Luis and I had seen with the drone, were data collection systems used to monitor residents, cameras, microphones, even software analyzing internet traffic to track behavior and conversations. It was surveillance on a scale nobody expected in a quiet suburb. The revelation terrified many neighbors. How long had this been going on? Who else was watching? How much of their private lives had been recorded and weaponized? The Department of Homeland Security took over HOA management temporarily, promising transparency and reform. They installed new security systems that prioritized privacy, audited every contract, and ensured that new board members would be community-elected and vetted. I was invited to speak at community meetings, both as a witness and a voice of reason. I told my story honestly, how a simple dispute over paint led to uncovering a criminal network. I urged neighbors to stay vigilant, to question authority, and to protect their rights. Some found it hard to believe a driveway dispute could spiral into federal crime. But that was the thing about corruption. It often hides behind the mundane, the everyday, the normal. A cracked driveway wasn't just a crack in the concrete. It was a crack in a system built on deceit. Through it all, Luis remained my rock. He helped me stay grounded when the media attention grew intense and when threats quietly surfaced. Anonymous notes slipped under my door, unfamiliar cars parked nearby. The threat never went away entirely, but the truth was out. Looking back, I realize how naive I was when I first refused to repaint that patch of concrete. I thought I was just standing up for my rights as a homeowner. What I didn't know was that I had stumbled onto something much bigger, a shadow network hiding in plain sight. The investigation is still ongoing, with additional arrests and prosecutions expected. But for me, it marked a turning point. It showed me the power of persistence, the value of curiosity, and the risks we sometimes take when we challenge the status quo. My driveway is finally repaired. The paint matches perfectly, but now, every time I walk past it, I don't just see a patch of concrete. I see the first step in exposing a secret that could have stayed hidden forever. And I know that sometimes, standing up for what seems small can change everything. The day the court finally dropped the judgment against me felt surreal. I had spent months tangled in legal battles, federal investigations, and a community divided by suspicion and fear. But when the ruling came down, it was clear. My stubborn refusal to repaint that driveway, that crime that had sparked everything, was vindicated. The HOA dissolved completely. The old board members were either arrested or under indictment, and a federal task force had temporarily taken over management of Meadow Ridge. With the HOA gone, things began to change in small but meaningful ways. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the neighborhood started to lift. Neighbors who had once avoided me or dismissed my concerns began stopping by my house, often with awkward smiles and apologies. I received gift cards for local restaurants, homemade pies, even invitations to barbecues. It felt strange at first, being suddenly the center of attention in a community that had treated me like an outcast for so long. I remember one afternoon when Mrs. Patel from down the street stopped by with her granddaughter, shyly handing me a batch of cookies. "We're sorry for how things were," she said quietly. "We never knew. We didn't understand." That was the truth for most of us. The corruption, the money laundering, the surveillance. It was hidden beneath the surface of a quiet, orderly neighborhood. We had no idea our own HOA was a criminal enterprise. The federal agents overseeing the neighborhood installed a new temporary HOA board made up of community volunteers vetted by the Department of Homeland Security. Their mission was clear: transparency, accountability, and rebuilding trust. Gone were the secret meetings behind closed doors and the opaque financial reports. Every decision, every dollar spent, was now documented and shared with the community. I was invited to join the new board as a technical advisor, helping them understand the digital security risks we had uncovered. It was a role I never expected to fill, but one I accepted with quiet determination. If my experience could help protect my neighbors from similar abuses in the future, it was worth it. The clubhouse, once a fortress of surveillance equipment and shadowy meetings, was transformed. The data servers and surveillance devices were dismantled and handed over to investigators. In their place, the community created a genuine gathering place, a library, meeting rooms, a space for neighbors to come together without fear or suspicion. My driveway, the catalyst of this entire saga, was finally repaved, on the government's dime, courtesy of restitution from the dissolved HOA. I stood there one afternoon, watching the workers smooth fresh concrete, the new paint perfectly matching, the neighborhood's approved color. It was more than just a driveway to me now. It was a symbol of justice, of persistence, and of a fight that started small but grew into something much bigger. The media coverage brought national attention to our little community. Interviews, podcasts, even a documentary crew showed up to tell the story of how a man's refusal to pay a petty fine led to exposing a criminal network embedded in a homeowners association. It was surreal watching myself on TV, explaining how a cracked driveway revealed corruption, surveillance, and money laundering that reached far beyond Meadow Ridge. Some neighbors were hesitant about the attention, fearing reprisals, or further, unrest, but most were proud that our community had stood up against powerful forces. We organized neighborhood watches, digital privacy workshops, and legal aid sessions to educate residents on their rights and how to spot abuses of power. Personally, the experience changed me. I went from being an unremarkable software engineer to an unlikely local hero. But I never forgot how close I came to being silenced, intimidated, or worse. The threats, the surveillance, the constant feeling of being watched, they left scars that wouldn't fade overnight. One night, months after the arrests, I sat on my porch with Luis. We reflected on how far we'd come, from simple suspicions about a paint color to blowing open a federal case. Luis, always calm and steady, said, "You never know where the truth will take you. Sometimes, it's the little things that matter most." That stuck with me. It was true. If I'd just paid the fine, ignored the notices, moved on like most neighbors suggested, none of this would have happened. The corruption would still be hidden, the money laundering continuing, the surveillance ongoing. Instead, a crack in my driveway became a crack in the entire system. The new HOA board is still in place, working hard to ensure transparency and protect the community from ever being exploited again. There are audits, regular reports, and community forums where residents have a voice. The board's motto is simple: together, we protect Meadow Ridge. I sometimes wonder if I'd have the courage to do it all over again. The stress, the threats, the media scrutiny. It was more than anyone should have to endure for a patch of concrete. But then I think about my neighbors, my community, and how much better off we are now. It was worth it. In the end, I learned that justice doesn't always come from the grand gestures or dramatic battles. Sometimes it comes from refusing to accept small wrongs, from standing firm over what seems trivial. My cracked driveway wasn't just concrete. It was a line drawn in the sand, and when I look at it now, smooth, freshly painted, unblemished, I don't just see a driveway. I see a victory. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can shake the foundations of even the most powerful institutions. Funny how justice sometimes starts with a hairline fracture.